Hey friends, I'm Megan, so glad you're here. We've got a great episode today. Let's get started.
The cafe sat in a muted haze of soft light, the glow from the overhead bulbs blending with the pale spill of the street lamps beyond the wide windows, casting a warm but subdued tone over the polished wooden tables and the muted hues of the walls. The quiet hum of the espresso machine filled the otherwise still air. Its low, rhythmic sound accompanied only by the faint hiss of steam now and then in the soft, distant rattle of rain gutters outside as the evening wind pushed gently against them. The chairs, arranged neatly around each table, carried no voices, no movement, the occasional faint creak of wood coming only from the shifting of the building itself as the night deepened beyond the glass. Her figure was still against this backdrop, seated near the window where the glow of the streetlight filtered through the thin glass, casting shifting shadows from the swaying branches of the tree outside, their delicate outlines crawling along the floor and across her shoes as the breeze stirred the leaves. Her hands rested lightly against the cool surface of the table, fingers tracing absent, slow movements along the faint grain in the wood as the reflection of the cafe's overhead light caught briefly on her nails before dimming again. A nearly untouched cup of coffee sat beside her, the dark liquid cooled long ago, a faint sheen along its surface where the lamplight flickered with each subtle tremor from the ceiling fan above, its steady rotation circling a soft, uneven current of air through the room. The sound of the fan blades turning overhead blended with the distant hum of a refrigerator unit tucked behind the counter, their combined tones forming a low, continuous note that hummed faintly beneath the other sparse sounds. The faintest undercurrent of life in an otherwise muted place. The faint smell of coffee grounds lingered heavily in the air, thickened by the absence of fresh brewing, carrying with it a subtle bitterness that clung to the senses and settled into the quiet space like a film. Outside, the street was nearly deserted, only the occasional shape of a passing car breaking the still image through the glass, each pair of headlights casting a slow-moving glow across the interior of the cafe before slipping away, leaving the muted yellow spill of the streetlight to dominate once again. Her breathing was even but deliberate, each inhale drawing the faintly chilled air into her chest, each exhale barely audible, vanishing into the layered hum of the machinery around her, her shoulders rising and falling in subtle, almost imperceptible motions. The wooden clock mounted above the counter ticked softly, its measured sound standing out more sharply each time it cut through a lull between the shifting of the fan and the distant mechanical hums, each second marked in a rhythm that felt slower than time truly passed, stretching the night in a quiet, deliberate cadence. Her eyes lingered not on the cup nor on the reflection of the cafe lights in the window but on the darkened street outside, where the faint orange glow of the lamps illuminated the wet pavement in patches, the scattered reflections shifting gently each time the wind coaxed ripples through the shallow puddles gathered along the curbs. The sound of the rain gutters beyond the cafe walls grew louder for a moment as a brief gust of wind pushed through the narrow street, the metal clinking softly as it shifted before settling again, leaving only the faint hum of the night air and the subdued mechanical chorus inside. A faint draft crept in each time the front door rattled softly on its hinges, the subtle vibration of its glass panel mixing with the occasional faint creak of the frame. Though no one passed through, no shape broke the still outline of the cafe's entryway, only the persistent pulse of the streetlight beyond casting shadows across its surface. The chair opposite hers remained empty, its shadow stretching long across the floorboards, elongated by the angle of the lamplight above, a shape that lay still, untouched, while the faint rippling of the curtain near the window shifted the light along its edges. The room seemed to breathe in a slow, shallow rhythm, the mechanical hums rising and fading as if exhaling, the steady ticking of the clock marking each inhalation in return. Their combined sound giving the illusion of motion where there was none. Her fingers stilled against the table's edge. Her posture unmoving now. Her gaze still locked outward as the streetlights flickered faintly from the wind's interference with the branches, sending shifting streaks of shadow crawling across her arms and the tabletop. Each fleeting line moving like the echo of something distant, almost forgotten, before melting again into the quiet glow of the cafe interior. The night pressed closer against the windows. The outside world a dim blur of moving leaves, faint light, and distant noises that never quite reached her. The cafe itself feeling suspended, isolated within the thin frame of its glass walls, holding its hums, ticks, shadows, and her still figure as the evening thickened around it, her hand lifted from the cool surface of the table with a slow, deliberate motion, her fingers brushing lightly against the faint condensation left from her untouched cup as they rose. Her wrist tilting so that her eyes could settle on the small clock mounted high on the far wall. Above the counter, the clock's muted, cream-colored face reflected a sliver of the soft cafe light, the brass frame dull rather than gleaming, and its slender black hands moved with a steadiness that seemed to cut through the otherwise sluggish pace of the evening. Each tick was audible in the quiet, distinct yet unhurried, a measured beat that echoed faintly across the room, marking each passing second in a way that felt weightier than its soft sound suggested, as though the night itself was stretching out in time with its rhythm. Her eyes followed the minute hand as it shifted another small fraction forward, the subtle motion more noticeable because of the stillness that surrounded it. The muted mechanical hum of the espresso machine behind the counter and the faint turning of the ceiling fan serving only as a backdrop, sounds that seemed to make the measured tick of the clock stand apart even more. Her breathing slowed as she continued to watch, the steady rise and fall of her chest matching the slow progression of the clock's hand. Each inhale drawn with a calm precision as if to keep pace. Each exhale fading into the layered sounds of the room. The light from the windowsill above the counter cast a faint reflection across the polished floor, stretching toward her chair in a wavering line that bent each time the ceiling fan above shifted. The air and the shadows trembled faintly on the walls. Outside the large window beside her, the faint glow of the street lamps painted the wet pavement in fractured light, the thin branches of the tree beyond swaying gently and casting shifting shadows that climbed along the glass and spilled into the cafe, their ghost-like shapes slipping over the empty chairs and the edges of the wooden tables before vanishing again into the corners. The faint hum of a refrigerator unit beneath the counter deepened momentarily before settling back into its steady note, the sound merging with the mechanical undertones of the cafe until it became something almost like a pulse beneath the space, a subtle vibration that pressed faintly against the edges of her perception. Her eyes shifted back to the clock, following its hands as they aligned briefly with the dull brass numerals on its face. The faintest reflection of the cafe light tracing along the glass cover and flickering across its surface when the ceiling fan's rotation brought a slight change in the air. She shifted her posture slightly, her elbow resting against the edge of the table now, fingers tracing idle lines along the grain of the wood as her gaze held on the slow movement of the clock's hands, her breathing still even, though deeper now, each exhale more deliberate as it left her lips. The sound of a passing car outside filtered in faintly through the glass, its tires hissing softly against the wet asphalt before fading away into the low, distant hum of the city, leaving behind only the quiet chorus of the cafe's mechanisms and the ever-present, deliberate ticking that seemed to grow louder each time the space fell completely still. A faint draft stirred as the front door shifted slightly on its hinges, the subtle vibration of the glass pane sending a muted rattle through the air. The chill carried inward, brushing along the floor and wrapping briefly around her ankles before fading into the heavier warmth near the center of the cafe. The curtain near her swayed with the breeze, its fabric whispering softly as it shifted, the movement casting a fleeting ripple across the reflection on the polished floor before it stilled again, settling back into its faint, almost imperceptible motion with the rhythm of the air. Her eyes lingered on the clock for several more seconds before they drifted toward the darkened window, following the path of a single line of rainwater trailing slowly down the glass, its shape bending as it caught the glow of the street lamp outside. A moving reflection that quivered and slid downward before breaking apart and disappearing at the sill. Her hand lowered slowly back to the table, fingertips pressing lightly against its surface once more, her breath falling back into the rhythm of the clock's ticking, the mechanical cadence marking the slow pull of the night as the sounds of the world outside dulled further, leaving her suspended in the soft hums, the pale shifting lights, and the faint, unwavering beat of time moving forward one quiet second at a time. The dim glow from the overhead lights cast a muted warmth over the cafe, their reflection trembling faintly on the polished wood of the tables as the ceiling fan above shifted the air with a slow, steady rotation. The low hum of the espresso machine and the deeper vibration of the refrigerator behind the counter filled the silence with a layered undertone, a background of mechanical sound that seemed to sink deeper into the space as the night stretched longer. She held her phone loosely in one hand, the faint blue light of its screen casting a pale glow across her fingers and the edge of the table, the light flickering slightly as she tilted the device and scrolled with slow, deliberate movements. Each new message she had sent remained marked as delivered but unread, the small icons on the screen static and unmoving, their presence more noticeable because of the motionless world around her, the ticking of the wall clock drawing each second into sharper focus as her eyes lingered on the unmoving notifications. Her thumb hovered over the screen, not pressing, only tracing along the edge of the glass, the faint warmth of the device contrasting with the cooler air that drifted periodically through the cafe as the front door rattled softly on its hinges with each subtle push of the outside wind. The curtain near the window swayed slightly again, the pale spill of the streetlight outside catching on its folds and sending faint, shifting shadows over her phone screen, briefly breaking the soft glow that reflected off the smooth surface before fading as the fabric settled back into place. Her other hand rested flat on the table, fingers splayed loosely, the tips tracing against the grain of the wood in slow, idle lines that left no marks but allowed her to feel the faint grooves in its surface, her movements barely perceptible beneath the faint hums surrounding her. Her breath moved slowly, steady but with a slight unevenness at the edges, the faint sound of air drawing into her chest audible only because of the quiet, blending softly with the rhythmic ticking from the clock and the distant rattle of rain gutters outside as the wind passed along the narrow street beyond the glass. The glow from the phone's screen dimmed as it shifted to standby, leaving her hand in shadow, the faint blue reflection fading from her skin and the edge of the table, replaced only by the warm, softer tones of the cafe's lights, their glow brushing across her knuckles and casting faint, elongated shadows over the polished wood. She tapped the device lightly, and the cold glow returned, briefly illuminating her face in sharp relief against the warmer backdrop, her features drawn into pale contours that softened again as the screen dimmed slightly, its brightness adjusting to the ambient light, each time the small icon confirming her unread texts remained unchanged. Her eyes traced it with the same slow, fixed attention, their movement unhurried but deliberate, the repetition of checking becoming another layer in the subdued rhythm of the cafe. The faint sound of a car engine drifted through the window, low and distant, accompanied by the soft hiss of tires on damp pavement. The noise swelling briefly before fading back into the near stillness that hung inside the cafe. The only consistent markers of time and motion the muted hum of the appliances, the whisper of the ceiling fan blades, and the patient, deliberate ticking of the clock on the far wall. Her phone dimmed once more, the glow fading as the screen went dark, her hand lowering slightly until her fingers brushed the cool surface of the table. The contrast between the warmth of her palm and the chilled wood grounding her as her gaze drifted away from the device to the window. Beyond the glass, the streetlight's glow wavered faintly as the branches shifted in the breeze. The thin streams of reflected light bending across the wet pavement, their faint movements slow and fluid, mirroring the unhurried, drawn-out pace of the space she occupied. The curtain stirred again, and with its motion, the faint shadows of the tree's branches crawled across the interior wall. Their soft, trembling shapes sliding over the edges of the empty chairs and the vacant tables. Fleeting impressions of movement in an otherwise unmoving scene. The clock ticked again, and again, its sound now the clearest in the cafe. Each measured beat cutting gently through the hums and whispers, marking the slow unraveling of time as the unread messages remained fixed and silent, their stillness pressing more firmly into the already weighty quiet of the room. She remained seated in the same spot near the wide window, her posture almost statuesque against the subdued hum of the cafe as the night continued to settle. Deeper beyond the glass, the chair beneath her creaked softly whenever she shifted her weight by even the smallest degree, its aged wooden joints responding to her presence with faint, almost hesitant sounds that faded quickly into the layered stillness of the space. Her hands rested now on the edge of the table, fingers interlaced lightly, unmoving except for the occasional faint twitch that passed through them, a movement so small it might have been mistaken for the settling of her breath rather than an act of intention. Her eyes drifted toward the surface of the table, following the pale reflection of the hanging lamp overhead as it trembled faintly with the slow currents of air stirred by the ceiling fan, the glow elongated and blurred by the faint sheen on the polished wood. The low hum of the espresso machine, still idling behind the counter, joined with the soft whirring of the refrigerator beneath it and the faint, rhythmic clicking of the fan as it rotated, creating a subdued chorus of mechanical sound that filled the silence but offered no warmth to the room. Outside, the streetlight's glow filtered through the branches of the tree across the narrow road. The delicate network of shadows they cast crawling intermittently along the glass and spilling into the interior of the cafe, tracing their way over her still figure and the unoccupied chairs surrounding her. Each motion a fleeting ripple of contrast that vanished as quickly as it came. Her breathing stayed slow and deliberate, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that aligned unconsciously with the steady ticking of the wall clock, each measured inhale and exhale almost as audible as the faint creaks from the structure around her. Whenever a gust of wind swept down the street outside, the curtain near the window stirred again with the passing draft, brushing softly against the side of her chair before retreating, its movement subtle but enough to set the patterns of shadow and light into motion along the floor. Once more, the faint lines shifting and folding until they disappeared into the darker corners of the room. The coffee cup beside her, long since cooled, had gathered a thin ring of condensation near its base, the faint glimmer of moisture catching the cafe's muted light, the dark liquid inside unmoved except when the occasional ripple passed across its surface from the vibrations of the appliances or the gentle tremor of air from the fan above. Her gaze shifted only briefly toward it before lifting once more to the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, layered over the view of the empty street beyond, her features soft and blurred by the double exposure of light and shadow. making her seem less like part of the cafe and more like a quiet observer suspended between the interior and the outside world. The faint rattle of the front door echoed briefly as another breeze pushed against it, the glass pane shivering against the frame before settling once again, the cool air slipping inside and wrapping lightly around her ankles, carrying with it the subtle scent of damp earth and pavement from beyond. The muted glow of the overhead lights dimmed slightly as the power line outside adjusted with the load from the street, the flicker barely perceptible but enough to make the shadows of the tables stretch and bend for a moment before steadying, her shoulders lowered with a deep exhale, the sound of it faint but tangible in the quiet, and the cafe seemed to hold that breath for a moment. Every mechanical hum, every subtle creak, every gentle tick of the clock weaving into a single, subdued tone that pressed gently into the air. She did not move beyond that slight release, her stillness filling the space as completely as the glow of the lights and the hum of the appliances, the emptiness of the surrounding chairs and tables becoming more pronounced in contrast to her solitary presence, as though the room itself acknowledged her as the only fixed point while everything else, the shifting shadows, the trembling reflections, the soft chorus of distant and near sounds, moved slowly around her without touching her anchored figure. The first faint patter of rain against the windows came as a soft, irregular tapping, barely audible over the low hum of the appliances and the whispering rotation of the ceiling fan, yet distinct enough to alter the texture of the silence within the cafe. The droplets gathered and streaked down the glass in slow, uneven lines, each trail catching the glow of the streetlight beyond and refracting it into trembling ribbons of pale gold that crawled across the slick surface before breaking apart near the sill. Outside, the sound of the rain grew steadier, a gentle drumming against the pavement that rose and fell as the wind shifted, carrying the soft hiss of water collecting in the gutters and rushing along the narrow street. Inside, the muted rhythm of the rainfall merged with the subdued mechanical chorus of the cafe, the layered sounds blending into something steady and enveloping, a faint shroud of motion and noise that made the interior feel even more still by contrast. She watched the droplets form at the top of the window pane, her eyes following as they swelled and began their slow descent, the path of each line intersecting with the trembling silhouettes of the tree branches beyond, their faint shadows thrown across the wet glass by the orange wash of the street lamp. Her hands rested loosely in her lap now, fingers laced together in a way that kept them still, though her thumbs shifted against each other in small, unconscious movements, a subtle friction that was almost inaudible but noticeable in the quiet. The curtain near the window moved more freely now, its fabric lifting and falling in response to the cooler drafts that slipped inside as the wind picked up outside, the shifting folds casting soft, distorted shapes of shadow across the floor, the light from the street bending as the curtain swayed and flickered. The coffee cup beside her had turned tepid, a faint dull reflection of the overhead light glimmering on the surface of the liquid as the fan stirred the air, causing the sheen to ripple slightly before settling again into a flat, motionless mirror. The sound of tires hissing over wet asphalt reached through the glass. A distant car passing slowly down the road, its headlights flaring briefly across the cafe's interior before fading, leaving behind the steady percussion of raindrops and the faint metallic rattle of the gutters shifting under the accumulating flow. The branches outside shook with another gust, sending thin streams of water flicking from their tips and sliding down the window in diagonal streaks, each droplet magnified by the light until it fell away beyond sight, joining the quiet cascade pooling along the edge of the street. Her breathing deepened slightly, each inhale pulling in the dampened scent of rain carried faintly through the narrow gap in the window, a smell that clung to the air as it mingled with the lingering bitterness of coffee grounds and the muted, metallic tang from the nearby counter. The cafe's lights flickered once as the weather outside strained the line beyond, their brief dimming stretching the shadows long and thin across the floor before they steadied again, restoring the warm, muted glow that painted the room in subdued, amber tones. Her gaze lingered on the window, following the endless motion of the rain and the shifting shapes it created. The soft percussion of droplets tapping in uneven rhythms blending with the ticking of the clock, until the two sounds became indistinguishable. A slow, unbroken cadence that filled the air around her. The front door rattled gently on its hinges once more as the wind pressed against it, the glass panel shivering and releasing a faint vibration through the quiet. A subtle tremor that traveled through the wood and into the stillness of the room. The reflections on the polished tables trembled with each small gust. The blurred shapes of the overhead lights and the faint glow from outside stretching and wavering, like ripples on a pond, their edges dissolving before they could fully settle again. She did not shift in her seat beyond the faint movement of her fingers, her presence a steady anchor within the space as the outside world grew louder, the rain intensifying and the wind bending the branches further, their long shadows skittering across the window and over the floor like fleeting shapes. The cafe absorbed it all. The patter of water, the hum of its machines, the tremor of the fan, the softened light, enfolded it into a quiet rhythm that seemed to stretch the night further. Each passing moment marked by the sound of raindrops trailing slowly down the glass and vanishing into the soft blur of the street beyond. She rose from her seat with a slow, deliberate motion, the legs of the chair scraping softly against the polished floor as she pushed it back. The faint sound swallowed almost immediately by the muffled cadence of the rain outside. Her hands slid briefly along the cool edge of the wooden table as she stood, fingertips tracing the faint grooves in the grain before falling to her sides, her arms settling in loose lines as she lingered there for a moment longer, her gaze still fixed on the window. Beyond the glass, the street stretched empty and glistening, the pools of water on the uneven pavement shimmering under the muted glow of the street lamp as the branches of the tree swayed and sent broken patches of shadow crawling across the wet surface. The raindrops streaked down the glass in unending streams now, their paths intersecting and merging as the wind carried new bursts of water against the pane, each rivulet catching the orange glow outside before it reached the sill and vanished into the darkness below. Her breathing moved in quiet, steady patterns, the rise and fall of her chest measured as she let her eyes follow one long droplet as it traced its way downward, its glistening shape distorting the reflection of the light before it slipped out of view. The curtain stirred again with the drafts, brushing lightly against her leg as she stepped back from the window, the soft fabric leaving a fleeting, cool touch against her skin before falling still once more. The hum of the appliances behind the counter seemed softer now as she turned toward the door, though their low mechanical tones still wove beneath the layered soundscape of the cafe, mingling with the faint clicking of the ceiling fan and the constant, patient ticking of the wall clock. Her shoes met the wooden floor with faint, deliberate sounds as she began to move, each step measured, the creak of the boards beneath her weight subtle but distinct in the muted air. The glow of the overhead lights spilled across her shoulders and down her arms, casting a faint, elongated shadow along the floor that stretched toward the row of empty chairs as she passed, her shape shifting each time the curtain rippled and allowed the cool, fractured light from outside to cut across the room. The scent of damp air grew stronger as she neared the door, carried inward with each tremor of the glass when the wind pressed against it, mingling with the fading aroma of stale coffee and the faint metallic trace of the fixtures around her. She paused at the threshold, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the doorframe for a moment as another gust of wind rattled the pane. the vibration running through the wood and into her palm, the faint cold seeping into her skin before she wrapped her fingers around the handle. The soft, metallic click of the latch echoed gently in the room as the door opened. The cooler outside air spilling in more freely now, carrying with it the fuller sound of the rain as it struck the pavement and rooftops beyond. The steady, layered percussion momentarily filling the cafe with its rhythm. Her figure shifted into the doorway, the glow from the street lamp filtering in behind her, casting her shadow long across the floor, a narrow, wavering silhouette that trembled slightly with the wind as the curtain lifted and fell again. The faint hum of the cafe's appliances seemed to recede further as she stepped across the threshold, her shoes meeting the slick stone outside with a muted sound, the wet surface dark beneath her feet as the rain continued to fall in soft, steady waves. The door eased shut behind her with a soft, deliberate motion, the edges meeting with a subdued thud before the latch caught, muting the sound of the rain to a faint, distant murmur that blended back into the persistent hum and ticking inside. The cafe stood still once more, the empty tables and chairs bathed in the warm, muted light, the curtain shifting gently in the lingering drafts as the reflections of the lamps trembled faintly across the polished floor. The rain traced its paths along the windows in countless silver lines, the streetlight beyond casting its glow across the slick glass, while the hum of the machines, the soft whir of the fan, and the even beat of the clock knitted together into a single, subdued note that filled the space she had left behind.
Thanks for watching. It means a lot. Share the video, and I'll see you soon.